Well, thank you very much. It's exciting to be here. You said I'm gracious in coming, but honestly, I'm just excited that you invited me back. It's one of the things I enjoy doing, so it's great to be back. And I'd also like to put a plug in for Kirka, that they do so many awesome things, and there are so many different facets to it. It's really exciting. So it's something that if you want to be more involved in the Westfield community, Kirka is one of the best ways you can do it. The resources there and the people there are fantastic. So I'm trying to build more of that into my courses because I'm so excited about it. So definitely look into it if you're interested. So as Dr. Jarvin was kind enough to say, we're going to talk about making use of Excel to try and organize your life. But the trick to this, and I struggle a little bit with trying to put together an example, is that using it, I can tell you all kinds of things about how you can use Excel to organize your life. And most of them will be meaningless in the sense of, unless you see it and follow along and do it, it's not going to make as much sense. And there are so many different facets to how Excel can be applied to different settings. Coming up with a series of examples proved to be challenging for me. So I'm taking a slightly different tack because mostly what Excel will enable you to do is manage data, right? It's a data management program that can do calculations and sorting and all kinds of stuff that help you take the data in your life, right? So whether it's personal finance or it's running a business or it's keeping track of stats for your local softball league, whatever the case may be, anytime you have data of any kind, Excel is a great tool for managing it and organizing it. And so I thought what we could do today is look a little bit at a existing and relevant data set to see a couple of different skills. And then at the end, I'll open it up if people have specific questions about, how would you apply this to a specific setting? I'm more than happy to field those. So I'm going to put a link in the chat that's going to take us to the European Center for Disease Control, because this particular website, this particular institution has great data on the spread of the pandemic, right? And so I thought this would be a decent topic for today, since this is something that's still, unfortunately, still going on, so it's relatively relevant. And it's a large and rich data set that allows us to do a number of different things. Okay, so if you go to this website, and actually I will share my screen if I should be able to do that, right?
I think you should be able to, before you start and before I forget, I know that some of the departments are providing you with credit or professional development credit for attending. So I'm taking down the names and providing those for the departments who've requested it. If your title is iPhone or George's iPhone, I don't know who you are. So if you don't mind, please emailing me maybe privately so I can at least let them know that you're here. Sorry about that, Robert.
Oh, no, that's okay. Yeah, no, anytime it's something, there's no problems to interrupt. If you have questions or something needs to be announced, by all means, that's good stuff. So, all right, so I'm going to share my screen. Let me see. This is, nope, it's not the right one. Or if it was not highlighting for me. So let me try this again. There we go. Okay, so this is the web page I put in the chat. If you're following along, if you'd like to follow along with the different things, you can also just watch what we do. But this link right here is the, either of these two links are the ones that I'm going to go to. So I want today's data. That's the COVID-19 geographic distribution. Okay, and then I'm going to stop sharing this because I'm going to open it. And when I do, I get a relatively large Excel file, which I will show you shortly if I can get this up and running. There we go. So this is this massive data set that has, on a day-to-day basis, how many cases a particular country had of the pandemic, right? So it's currently it's organized in alphabetical order for country. So we start with Afghanistan and then move into Albania, et cetera, right? And so there's something like 211 countries listed here. I don't know if this is the complete list of countries in the world. I'm not familiar with how many total there are, but this is everyone who reports COVID cases. Okay, so just as an example, this date value is going to be today, actually, interesting. And there were 87 cases of COVID-19 reported in Afghanistan today, right? That's what this says. Now, if you look at this, you might say, well, I don't know how that says that because it's difficult for me to see what's going on. And that's one of the important things about Excel, is that it'll let you manage and see what the things are that you need. And I'll talk about how to do that in just a second. But before we really dig in, and I want to talk a little bit about Excel and the possibilities, so that people have a chance to get going. And if you have questions about this, please feel free to either chime in or pipe up in the chat and just say, hey, I can't get this for whatever reason. But I'd like to start talking about Excel as if it's the movie Shrek, right? So this is something that most people are familiar with if you've ever seen Shrek. If you haven't, Shrek is an ogre. And at one point in the movie, Shrek says ogres are like onions, and one of the other characters says because they stink, right? And it's no, because they have layers. And so I often pitch Excel in the same manner, that Excel, sometimes when you try and do something, it doesn't do exactly what you want. So sometimes it stinks, but mostly it's just that you're not at the right layer. Right? There are a number of different layers to Excel, and if you start peeling them back, you'll see a lot of different functionality that's available here. Okay, so right, if there are any questions about the data set, please go ahead and pop them in the chat. I just want to show you a little bit about the data set before we do anything. Okay, so this data set is massive, and this is one of the things that Excel offers. That's one of the biggest benefits, which is it lets you have tons and tons of observations. So there are 50,000 observations of data here across the 211 different countries. So that's a ton of data. Right? Most people don't have 50,000 observations for things. But if you run a business and you want to track like daily sales, over the course of the year, you're going to have 365, right? Or however many days you were open. And keeping track of that, Excel is a great way to do it because it's hard to have that much data in kind of any other format. But Excel is nice for handling data. So when we look at this, we say, okay, this is great. All my data is in here. I just can't see all of it. I can't see what everything means, right? The headings are jumbled. This column seems to have some sort of error in it, et cetera, et cetera. So the first thing I want to do is I want to size my columns, right? Excel will let us play with these things so we can expand or contract the size of the column as appropriate. And if you have a bunch of columns, it's a little bit of a nuisance to do by hand. So the thing that I really like about Excel is it's set up to automate almost anything you can want to do, including column sizing. So I'm going to highlight by clicking on the column letter and then dragging across. I can also, actually, I'll show you the other mechanism for that in a second, but I'll click on this and highlight and show you all the columns here. And then if I look at my mouse, right, so my cursor right now is that big fat white plus sign. And if I mouse over right between two of the columns, I see that I get this, I don't know if it has a special name. It's the double arrow. It's like opening elevator doors type cursor. If I'm there and I double click, it will auto size all the columns for me so that all of the values in the column are displayed completely. Okay, so this date rep, which is the date of the record, is displayed completely all the way down, day, month, year, the number of cases, the number of deaths, the countries and territories names. So you might say, well, this one seems like it's too large because I've got all this white space over here and all this white space here. But the reason it's this wide is that there is some country somewhere that is long enough that you need this much space to display the whole thing, right? So the advantage to doing it this way with that double click is that Excel will auto size so you can see all of them, right? If I had done this myself, I would have picked a value about there or a width about there. And then as I scroll down through the different, I think it's, yeah, right, here's one. Cases on an international conveyance in Japan, right? This gets cut off, so I can't see all of this, right? So that double click feature will resize so I can see the entirety of everything in the column. Right, so if I scroll down, and I'll spare you scrolling down the whole thing, but all of the country names are now fully displayed because of this double click. Okay, so just being able to see your data is a huge advantage that Excel provides. And it's one of the best features I particularly like. So if you're keeping track of your own personal finances or you're keeping track for a business, having appropriate column sizes can be really handy. Another thing about this is, right, so some of this is displayed in a manner that's not exactly visually appealing, right? This is jumbled up a little bit here. These numbers are right against the country codes, the country names, right? So it's a little bit smushed. And what I might want to do is I might want to mess with the alignment for the columns. Okay, And so I can say for the values in a particular column, I may not want them to be right aligned or left aligned. I may want them center aligned. And so I can do that with the countries here. So if I highlight this whole column by clicking on up here next to the G, on the Home tab, there's these 3 buttons here that do alignment. Right? So in the alignment field, we have align left, align right. Oops, this is align right. And then this is align center. And so if I click on the center one, it moves everything to the center. So now there's a little more space. Things are a little more balanced. Right? And while it may not matter as much for this column, I think it will certainly look better for this column if I center things so that the number of cases per 100,000 is centered, right? So this looks a little bit nicer, and you can do this with whatever columns you think are appropriate to center, so it's easier to see. Right now that things are centered, there's a little bit of space between the different columns, and so it's just a little easier to see on a visual sense. And this is also one of the things about data that sometimes gets to be difficult, is actually just seeing it can be hard. And Excel lets us kind of put it in whatever format we want, and there are a ton of different mechanisms here to do so. Are there any questions about column sizing, column alignment? We can also move things around with cut and paste. So if I want this column to be at the end, I could right click or whatever the Macintosh equivalent is, and I could cut this and I could paste it somewhere else, right? So Excel lets us organize the data however works best for us. I'm going to leave the current alignment and the current column organization because I don't have any strong preference about what should be where. The next thing I want to talk about is just navigating within Excel itself. Right, so this data set is huge, and we see that as I scroll down, if I'm scrolling here using the scroll wheel on my mouse, if you look over here at this scroll bar, it's going to take me a while to get to the bottom. Right? This is something that I would be doing for, I don't know, 10 or 15 minutes before I got to the bottom, because it's 50,000 rows, right? So we're down here at the 50,200. Right, and now I've navigated to the bottom twice. There's a shortcut for this. Okay. So if I start at the top, right, I can navigate using the arrow keys on my keyboard, and they just take me a little square here. But if I combine the arrow keys with another button, it will let me maneuver a lot faster. So on a PC, this is Control. I think this might be Command on Macintosh. I'm not as well versed in terms of the keyboard shortcuts for Macs. But if I hold the Control key and then hit the right arrow, what this will do is this will take me to the last continuous observation to the right. I can do the same thing going down. So if I hold Control and then the down button, it's going to take me to the last continuous cell here. And so we see there's values all the way down to 273 in this particular column, and then there's a gap. Okay, so if I've got gaps, the Control button's not going to take me all the way to the end. It just takes me to the end of that series of data. Right? To see the entirety of the data set, I started in this column because there's a date value for every observation. So there are no gaps in this one. If I start in the upper left and hit Control and use the down arrow, this takes me to the very last observation. Okay. So if you have continuous data, the Control and arrow keys will take you around, right? So if I hit Control and right, this is going to take me to this value here in K 50,203, because that is the last continuous value here. Okay. So again, if you've got a data set that you're managing with your personal finances or your personal sales at your business, at some point you may have more observations than you can see on the screen, and being able to navigate quickly from one piece to another is really handy. And I think this is continuous, so I'm going to go up from here all the way back to the first row. Now, one of the things that you may have noticed is that when I scroll past that first page, it's Command and arrow. Thank you. Perfect. Okay. So those of you using Macs, it's Command and arrow as opposed to Control. Right? So that's the Control button is analogous to Command for Macintosh. So as we look at this particular page, we notice that when I scroll, I lose these headings. And it might be helpful for the headings to stand out a little bit. So I might want to make them bold so I can highlight all of them. Oops. And actually, let's do this using our keyboard shortcuts because I forgot there's one more I want to show you. When you go to select things, right, you can click and drag, but sometimes this is a little cumbersome, especially if you don't have a separate mouse. If you're trying to use a trackpad, it's difficult sometimes to get exactly the range that you want. So what you can use is the Shift key in combination with your arrows. All right, so my arrows, again, navigate me. But my Shift key, if I use Shift and hold it down and run the arrow keys, I can select different ranges. So in this case, I want the entirety of my columns, and I can make them bold, either up here in the ribbon. Sorry, I blanked for a second there. In the font tab of the home, in the font section of the home tab on the ribbon, there's a button for bold. And also if you mouse over and just hover your mouse there, it will show you what the keyboard shortcut is. So for PCs, it's Control and B. I imagine it's Command and B and Macintosh. So I want to make these bold so that I know what is what. Right, this is the date value, the day, the month, the year, the number of cases, the number of deaths on that particular day, countries and territories. This is a geographic code. This is a different country code. The thing that we'll be interested in is the population data as of 2019, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so I can make things bold, but that shift and arrow thing where you highlight a different range allows for a high level of precision, which is nice. But one of the things you can do is you can actually combine that with the control button or the command button if you're a Macintosh. Right? So command and arrow takes you to the end of a particular row in a continuous sense. Shift and arrow highlights and selects. If you put those together and use Control, Shift, and the down arrow, or Command, Shift, and down, it will highlight everything in a particular column. And then if I wanted everything here on the sheet, I could then also then press again, Control, Shift, and the right arrow, and this will take me across to highlight everything. So if I need to select an entire range and the range is more than I can see on the screen, the combination of Control and Shift or Command and Shift and the arrow keys will allow me to navigate and select different ranges. Right, there is also the feature where you can select everything by using either Command A or Control A, and that does the same thing. Right, so the Command A will highlight everything in terms of the number of rows that have data and the number of columns that have data. It will highlight all of it for us. Okay, so that's pretty handy. But as I was saying, as I scroll away, I miss these headings, which if I get down here into the 200s and I think, oh crap, I don't know which one of these columns I need anymore because I don't know which one is which. Is this day? Is this month? Well, this one's probably year, but is this cases, deaths? Which one is which? I'm not sure. Right? And I have to go back up to the top, and I can use my command arrow to get back to the top, the control arrow. But then if I need to go back to a specific row, it's really hard to get back to where I was, especially if, say, I needed to be at a cell here in the 20,000s. Right? I'm thinking, okay, which one is this? Is this cases or deaths for the particular day? And I come back up and I'm like, okay, so column E is cases, but now I have to get back to column 21,265 or wherever I was. There's actually a mechanism to get around that, right? And it's called freezing panes. So if I navigate to the view segment of the ribbon, there's a piece up here that's called freeze panes in the window piece. And what freeze panes is going to do is it's going to say anything to the left or anything above the cell I select is always going to be on the screen. Okay, so just to show you what I mean here, let's say I always want to see the date, and let's say I always want to see these headings. So that as I scroll either to the right or that I scroll down, column A or row 1 will always be visible. I can select cell B2, right? Because freeze panes is going to say anything above the cell I've selected or anything to the left of the cell I've selected will be kept. Right? And then I click on freeze panes and I freeze panes, right? Keep rows and columns visible while the rest of the worksheet scrolls based on current selection. Which is slightly misleading because it's not based on the current selection, it's based on what's above or to the left of the current selection. But if I click this for freeze panes, I will see, and this is a little bit difficult because they're real light, but there's now a permanent line here and a permanent line that's a little bit darker than the standard row dividers that go across. And now as I scroll down, we'll see, oh, the column headings come with me. So if I go back to column 25,000, row 25,000, whatever it was, 23,000 here, I could say, oh, this particular cell represents cases, this one's the day, this is the country, this is their population. And so being able to always see these things is handy. A lot of times people will have a table of values where you need to know what's on the left because that's the identifier, right? It's either a person's name and you're tracking, how many days did they come to work this month, and it's, the days are going to go right across and go off the screen. So if I scroll to the right here, we'll see that the other columns slide underneath that date value, but no matter how far over to the right I scroll, I can always see the date value, right? And I still see column one up, or I'm sorry, row one up here. This is also still available. Okay, so freeze panes can be pretty handy in terms of what it allows us to see. So I'm going to get us back to the top here. Yeah. Okay, so freeze panes is real helpful. And then if you want to get rid of it because you don't necessarily want to see things, we can unfreeze panes, and it just undoes that. So that, again, when we scroll, the first row is no longer visible. Since I want that first row, I'm going to leave it frozen there so we can always see what's going on. But that's freeze panes and some navigation. Do we have any questions on that?
I have a question just in general for the students. How many of you are currently using, I'm going to do a polling just for my curiosity as well. How many of you are currently using Excel in your courses? So I'll create that poll, or okay. How many, can you raise your hand or put a fake hand up there, whatever? Okay, so some students and some not. Somebody's that. Okay, thank you.
One of those things that we talk about in business as I always tell students it's the most important thing I teach them in my class is better Excel skills, just because it's so ubiquitous in terms of the workforce, kind of regardless of the field that you're in. There are some fields that have very highly specific data management softwares that you have to learn about because they have something specific that they need. So if you continue on, for instance, in finance past a certain point, we no longer use Excel. We use a program called Stata because it does much better analysis than what Excel has to offer. But for basically everything up to that point in finance, we use Excel. And I know this is true for a lot of other disciplines as well.
Yeah.
If you're not using it yet, you might be.
Yeah, and it's really great when you are able to use it through classroom activities because it gives you a sense of the power that it has, but definitely in science, we use it quite a bit. Good way to manage all that data.
Yeah. Well, and it does so many different things with the data, which is actually what we're going to do next. So with your permission, I will.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure I didn't want to cut off the poll if you had other questions, I think so. Okay, so other than actually just seeing your data, which is an integral part of it, being able to manipulate the data is pretty handy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete, actually I'm not going to delete anything. I'm going to insert something here. Okay, so I'm going to highlight columns B and C. And oops, why did the chat feature not pop up? I see there's a question in the chat, but it won't pop up on my screen. I don't know where it is. There we go.
Amanda.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. She has to run. Thank you, Amanda.
There we go. Okay. So I'm going to highlight columns B and C by clicking and dragging across B and C, and this highlights everything there. And then I can right-click or whatever the Mac equivalent of right-clicking is, and this brings up this menu where it allows me to insert rows or insert columns. So I will have two new columns here because what we have here are dates and then the day, month, year. And so what I'm about to do is not necessary in this case because we already have this, but I want to show you what's possible based on this because this is one of the more useful skills in Excel that's often overlooked. Right? So it's often the case that we get data in a format that comes condensed into a single cell. And what we want is we want to spread it out. Right? So let's say that I wanted the month and the day and the year to be in separate columns. And you can look at this and say, well, I already have this, so why bother? But there are a lot of cases where these columns are not going to be there. Right? There are a number of different data sets that will come down that are just comma separated, right? So you have one value, comma, next value with commas in between them, and it's all just in one column. And if you had to go down each column and separate the values into separate columns, it would take forever. But fortunately, we don't have to do that because Excel has a built-in tool that will do this for us. Right? So this tool is found on the Data tab of the ribbon, and it's called Text to Columns. So it takes the value in a cell that is a longer string of text and breaks it into smaller pieces based on what we decide. Okay, so I'm going to want to do text to columns with this data. So I'm going to highlight the data in column A. And there are 3 values here that I'm going to want. So I want to make sure I have 3 columns to catch this data, because otherwise it will overwrite existing data. So I need this to have a month and day and year column for each of those. And so the existing column will take the first value. Column B will catch the 20 here, and column C will catch the 2020. So if I click text to columns, this menu pops up, and can someone just give me a brief head nod to see that you also see this? Okay. So sometimes I'm not sure what is shared in the screen with Zoom, because I don't get to see what you see. But the convert text to columns wizard pops up, and there are 3 steps, so it's not too difficult. We just have to decide what it is we want. In this case, or in most cases, probably it's going to be delimited. Right? We want something where we choose, they call it the delimiter, which is the thing that we want to divide on. Right? I want to convert this particular character into a column break instead of the character that it is. Right? I could also do fixed width in this case, because most of these things are about the same distance apart. But it will be a little bit challenging because they're not all exactly equal. So fixed width is one that I don't use very often. It works real well if you have data that is exactly the same format, just spread out, and it's got tabs or something between it. But even then, most of the time, I would recommend the delimited version. So let's see how this works, right? So we click delimited, we click next, and we have to choose what the delimiter is, right? So this is, most of you, I tried this yesterday, which is why it's preloaded. Most of you will see the list of delimiters here. There's tab, semicolon, comma, and space is kind of the default. But then it has this option for other that says, what other character might you want to use to break things into columns? And in this case, I want to use this slash. And I think this is the backslash. I don't know. I always get backslash and forward slash confused. It's the one that slants from top right to bottom left. And so I want to enter that in the other box, and then I want to check the other box. And we'll see down here in the data preview that when I check and uncheck, we go from the existing values to what it's going to look like, and those vertical lines represent a column break. Okay, so if I'm splitting this based on this slash, I will, instead of having 10/20/2020, I will have 10 in one column, 20 in another, and 2020 in a third column. Okay. It also allows us to treat consecutive delimiters as one. So if for some reason, right, and I'm just going to show you how this works, if you were here, you don't need to exit out. But in this case, if I had accidentally entered this here, right, so I've got 10 /20 /2020, right, and now I come in and look at text to columns, go to delimited again. Right, this top column, this top row is botched because there were accidentally 2 delimiters in there. So it's saying 10 column break 20 column break 2020. When all I want is 1 column break in the middle. So if I check this treat consecutive delimiters as 1, it will fix this piece up here so that we again have this. Right? So if for some reason there's a bunch of delimiters all in a row, it just treats them all as 1.
So can the delimiter be, like you said, a comma instead of a backslash? It just happens to be backslash here because of the date.
Correct.
A comma or semicolon or tag or hashtag or whatever it is, then that's what you put in that box.
So I often see this as like a list of names. So if you have a list of participants that showed up to something and it's all just one text piece, right? So from Microsoft Word, you have, I'm just going to read the names down here. So Robert Schatz and Denise Jarvinen, and then George's iPhone and Molly Babin and Gretchen Conrad. And it's just commas between all of them. Right? You could copy paste that whole text string right here into Excel and it would fill in one cell. And you might want each of the names in the different columns so you can put different information under each of us. Splitting based on whatever was between the names would work. The one thing you do have to be careful is sometimes there are things that are, so like if you envision a setting where you have all the state names and you've got like Massachusetts, and then there's just a space between Massachusetts and I don't know what comes next alphabetically, but so it's Maine and Maryland and then Massachusetts, right? And if you have just spaces between them and you're like, oh, there's spaces between the states, let's use that as a delimiter, you have to be careful because it's going to treat any space as a column break. So like New York will become 2 columns and New Mexico will become 2 columns. So there are often things that you may want to do to manipulate the data so it comes in exactly the format you need. But in that case, I think what I would do is I would convert all the spaces to commas and then go back in and manually change new comma York to new space York and then divide on commas. So sometimes it might take more than one step and you have to get a little creative with this sometimes. But simply knowing that this tool exists so you can start thinking about how to apply it, especially if you've used it a couple of times, it gets to be a lot easier. But yeah, you can choose any of these things and you have the ability to set it as whatever you like. One that I see often is the underscore. It's often a delimiter between columns. And we're actually going to see what to do with the underscore in a different setting in just a moment. So I'm going to leave it as the slash for now, and I'm going to uncheck the tab. This isn't going to change anything in this case, but oftentimes there's more than one type of delimiter in a cell. And if you know that you only want to split on one, it's going to be difficult to scroll through all of the values to see what the preview looks like. And so I might want to remove this just in case anything has a tab and I don't want anything to get split into more columns by accident. Right? So typically just including the delimiter that you want is the one that's the right choice here. Okay. I can click next, and this allows me to set different formats. I very rarely use this part of the wizard because I'm much more familiar with assigning formats after the fact, but you can assign formats here to say, oh, the result here, that this should be something specific, right? I want it to have 2 decimal places or whatever the case may be. You can actually do that here. But I don't generally do it in this wizard because I think it's a little bit more confusing than just doing it manually after the fact. So I generally just click finish. And what we'll see is when I click finish, I now have a bunch of values here that don't look right. Okay, so if I look at this, I say, oh, wait a minute, this is not what I wanted at all. But the reason for this is not that I've done it wrong, it's that Excel has formatted this incorrectly. Okay, so Excel took the existing format and applied it to all of them. And so what I need to do now is apply a different format. Okay, because what this really is, 1/10/1900, is the date representation of the number 10. Right, so if I undo we had 10, 20, and 2020 as the 3 values. Excel treats dates as the number of days from January 1st, 1900. And so when I ran my text to columns, this is actually the value 10. It's just represented as a date because this is 10 days after the beginning of 1900. And this is 20 days after, and this is actually 2020 days after the beginning of 1900. So the values are there and they're correct. They're just in the wrong format. So I want to I'm going to use my shift and arrow keys to highlight these 3 values. And then I'm going to use my control shift down arrow or my command shift down arrow, as the case may be, to highlight the entirety of these columns. And up here on the home tab under number, where it says date, I don't want these things to be listed as date. I want them to be listed as either general or number. And I'm going to pick general in this case. And we'll see that when that happens, things are converted to the format we need. So I can go back to the top here. And we see that this is 10, 20, 2020. Right, so it's there. It's just that Excel got confused because we went from a date format and tried to split it, so it maintained that date format. And I just needed to change that. Okay. And now this is pretty much what we have in these 3 columns matches these 3. Okay. And so if I wanted to, I could delete these columns, and I'm not going to because I often find after I've deleted something, I accidentally want to find it later, so I'm just going to leave them as they are. The nice thing about this is we can actually go the opposite direction. Right? In this case, I could just undo, but it may be the case that what we've been provided, I should relabel these so I'm clear, month, day, year. It's not unlikely that we might have something where we have data split across, and we want to put them together. So I do this in my classes every semester, because when I download data from Plato to see what my course roster is and what the grades are, it gives me last name, first name. And I like to look at people's names as just a unit, right? So your given name and your family name, or family names as the case may be, I want to see that, right? In my case, my given name is Robert, my family name is Chat. And so I don't want to see Chat in one column and Robert in the next. I want to see Robert, Chat in one column. Okay, and there's a way to do that. So we can put values from separate columns back together. And this isn't a tool in Excel, this is a function. Okay, so Excel has a number of different built-in functions. In fact, it's got a colossal number of built-in functions, many of which most of us will never use. But this is one that I use, I want to say all the time, right? This is something that I didn't know existed until I was well into my Excel career. And when someone showed this to me, my head exploded. I was just like, I have been like, how did I not know this? This could have been so useful to me before. So I like showing people this function. The function is called concatenate. And since that's kind of a strange one to spell, I just start typing it, right? So it starts with C-O-N, and it's the first choice here, right? It's concatenate, and it joins several text strings into one text string. So I can double click on this and it will fill that in for me. So if you have trouble remembering it, just start, it starts with C. It's the function that starts with C and then C-O-N, and it will fill in. And if you just have C, it'll give you the whole list. You can scroll down until you find concatenate, because it's the one that's got the weird name. What concatenate does is it will put things together in the order that I specify. So if I want month, day, year, I could say, oh, concatenate these three things. This is not what we're going to end up doing, so I'm just demonstrating what it does. You don't have to follow along with this piece. But if I click enter here, it will say, interesting, this gives me a value problem. That's not what it did yesterday, but what I expected it to do was say 10202020, which isn't that helpful, because what we want is a date format. And so instead of selecting all of them, what I want to do is I want to select them one at a time. Okay. And I want to recognize that between them, I want slashes again. Right? And so I need to specify that. So this 10 can be the first input, but then I want to put, so I'm going to clear the rest of this so it's easier. Right? So A2 is first, right? The value here in this cell. And then after the 10, I'm going to want a backslash. I think it's a backslash. And so I'll enter a slash in quotation marks. So Excel knows to add this. Right? And then I will select this particular cell. And again, I want a slash between. And then I will enter this cell. Right? If you're following along, I promise I'll highlight this again so you can see. I just want to show what it does. When I hit enter now, I have 10, 20, 20, 20. So this is in fact what we started with. So I can go back to this using this formula here. Okay, so it's saying take the value from this cell. After that, add a slash, then take the value from this cell, add a slash, then take the value from this cell. And the nice thing about this is we've set this up to be what's called a relative cell reference. Okay. So in the formula here, this says give me the value from A2, but what it actually is telling Excel to do is from the cell in which we're working, give me the value that comes 3 columns to the left. So if I move this formula, it's going to apply itself to 3 columns to the left. Right? So one of the things you can do with formulas is copy pastes. And so I can copy this formula, which was, again, this one plus a slash, plus this one plus a slash, plus this value. Right? And so it said, give me the value 3 columns to the left, then add a slash, then give me the value 2 columns to the left, then give me a slash, then give me the value 1 column to the left, and smush that all together. Right? And since it was a relative cell reference, as I copied the formula down from this cell to this one, it updated which cells it's looking at. So it's no longer looking at these 3. It's looking at the values in row 3, right? It's looking at these 3 values. So the references moved with the formula because they were what's called a relative cell reference. Okay. And the nice part about this is there's a fast way to copy stuff down. So you might look at this and say, well, that's great, but I don't want to have to copy this 50,000 times. And I'm right there with you because neither do I. Once you have the formula built so that it will automatically update as you move up and down or left and right, you can mouse over the lower right-hand corner of the box that has the formula in it. And you see your plus sign goes from this empty white one to this solid black one. And if you can click and drag to highlight some, which will do it. But again, I don't want to click and have to drag all the way down to the bottom 50,000 rows. So instead, what I will do is I will double click and it fills in all of them for me. It just takes a second because there were 50,000 of them in this case. Right, so most of the time, we're not going to have 50,000 observations, but even if you've got 100, being able to auto copy the formula down is kind of a big time saver, especially if you're like me and you're like, oh, I think this is the formula I need. And you try it and you copy it down and then it doesn't work. So you have to make an adjustment and then copy it down and then make another adjustment and copy it down. If you're doing this several times, being able to just say, this is the one I want, go, is very handy. Right, so that's introduction to formulas, which is kind of nice. The one thing about this is that these are not dates in the sense that Excel typically treats dates. So I'm going to insert another column here. So this is dates, and this is going to be called actual date. Because another thing that's nice about Excel is that because of the way Excel treats dates, you can actually calculate the distance between two dates because it'll give you the number of days between them. But you can also add and subtract. So if I wanted to know what day was 10 days or 100 days before today, ordinarily I could say this minus 100. Oh, it does work. It is a date. This is not functioning the same way when I tried it yesterday. Interesting. It's treating this as a date, but it's a formula. So if I wanted to copy paste this somewhere else, because these are relative cell references, copy pasting this somewhere else isn't going to work. Okay, so if I copy paste it this direction, we'll see that I have a very strange output. Right? So what I want is not necessarily a copy. What's been done is it's copied the formula. So you see this formula is columns 3, 2, and 1 to the left, squished together with slashes in between them. This column does the same thing, right? This is 3 columns to the left, 2 columns to the left, 1 column to the left, all smushed together with slashes between. And so that's where I got this funky result. If I just want the value that's in this, I can copy it. So if I like to use my keyboard shortcuts. So copy on PC is Control and C. It's Command and C on Macintosh. And then if I want to paste it and I just want the value that's in that column and not the formula, I can come up to the paste feature here. And this third option going down is values. So when I paste it, it pastes the value that's the output from the formula in column D. Okay. And so I have here the dates. And now if I copy this around to different locations, this is just the same date. And so the value has been pasted, not the formula, which is kind of nice. Do we have any questions on that? So I'm going to delete this column because I don't need this here. We're going to do this in a different sheet. Okay, so this I think is, so that was all kind of just functional stuff. Let's talk for the last couple minutes here about how to manage data and present it with different features. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, I'm going to create a new worksheet. So this tab is often what people call them. This is actually a worksheet, and I can introduce a new one by clicking on this plus sign down at the bottom. I can also right-click down in this menu. I can right-click on this one and insert a new sheet if I want. So blank worksheet. I like using the plus sign because it's just a faster mechanism for me. If I want to name it something specific, I can double-click on the sheet name and change its name. So this is going to be Daily Summary Worldwide is the name I'm going to give this. And what I want to do on this sheet is I want to create a summary of the number of cases in a worldwide sense that happens on every day. Because if I look at this, I have for this date in Afghanistan how many cases there were, and I'm going to have a corresponding value for Albania and Algeria and all of the other countries that you can name in this particular list. But that doesn't give me a day-to-day basis for the entirety of what's going on in the globe. Right, so that's what I want to do next. And this starts pushing into some more of the, I hesitate to use the word advanced, but it's just more of the functionality of Excel. Right? So let's peel back another layer and see what can be done. I'm going to copy because I want every one of the dates that's possible. Right, so I'm going to copy this whole date range. So copy it, and when I use the Control-C button, you'll see that it gives this scrolling dotted line around to let me know this is what I've highlighted, selected, and what I'm going to paste. Again, recognizing that these are formulas, I can't just paste it directly on this sheet. So I'm going to have to use my paste values feature. I will paste them here. And now I have all of the dates in the entire data set. Except what I have is a repeating sequence of all of the dates, because there was a October 20th for Afghanistan, and if I scroll far enough down here, there's an October 20th for the next country as well, which is right here, right? And I don't need that. So I could just delete this, right? But I'd have to delete a whole bunch of them, and I don't really want to do that. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to highlight this column and use a different feature in Excel. So I'll highlight this, I'll come back to my data tab, and say, let's look at remove duplicates. So if I click remove duplicates, with this column highlighted, what it's going to do is it's going to take out all the duplicates that are in this column. Right? So I'll just click OK. All right, and it took out nearly 50,000 observations. There are 296 unique values that remained. Right? So because one of them is the value date that I gave it, that means there are 295 different dates in here. And so if I look at this, the dates run from 12/31 all the way up to today. And we'll see that these are at the end because Afghanistan didn't have observations for these days. So this is a little bit jumbled, which actually takes me to my next piece. If I have some sort of range that I want to organize, also in this data tab, I can filter. So if I click on the filter button, now what this does is to let me say, oh, I can organize these in a specific order, and I may want to have, it says A to Z, so I'm going to click that, and what it does is it gives me the values in order, although this is, why is this doing this? It's because these are specified as general. So I want to highlight all of them. So Command Shift and down arrow or Control Shift down arrow. And I want to change these to be dates. So I'm going to say this is the short date format. Nothing changes except for how Excel treats them. So if I then go back to my filter and click on this, I may have to redo the filter. So I'm going to take it off and put it back on. Instead of A to Z, it should now have, why does it not have smallest to largest? Interesting. These are supposed to be date values. I don't know why I did this.
So is there for students who want to learn more about this, or students who are just starting to like figure out how to use basic aspects of Excel, is there like a do you have a YouTube channel that you recommend for like short video tutorials, or is there a really good site that they can go to you know, like is there a site that you found that's been really good in terms of like short video tutorials that can say, this is how you do what you're doing, or this is how you do more basic functions?
It's hard to pick just one. I don't have a favorite YouTube channel. The documentation that goes with Excel online is so good that almost any resource you can find is going to be helpful. The trick is not so much finding a specific website as it is knowing the thing that you want to ask about. So I think one of the nice pieces about Excel is that it doesn't have a steep learning curve in terms of using it for things. The one where it does have a steep learning curve is figuring out what it is you need to Google to then find the thing that you need. Right? So that was, once you kind of teach yourself what it is that you need to Google in terms of keywords for what it is you're trying to do, most of the stuff that you'll use in Excel is not going to be something that you remember to do immediately offhand, because you're not going to use it quite enough to have it memorized, but you'll understand it well enough that when you go to Google and look at one of the help pages, you're like, oh, this is exactly how this goes again.
Yeah. And it looks like Cassie said she wrote in there, she used sort instead of filter, and it looks like it has sorted correctly.
Okay.
Thank you. That's pretty impressive. You're
Thank you,
doing this
Cassie.
along.
I'll take my filter off. I can use sorts. Oops. Once. I don't know why mine's doing it different. That's okay. I'm going to take a small shortcut here. This was not supposed to work like this, but this is what we're going to do just briefly. Okay, so I'm going to have this is again in the right order.
So I have another question too for you. I don't know if I'm disrupting your thought processor. One of the things that I struggle with using Excel, especially large data, is just printing out that information in a spreadsheet that makes sense. I mean, otherwise it like prints out these columns and whatever and multiple pages, and I haven't found a really good way to do it. And if you try to condense everything into a page, you can't see it.
Yeah, that's definitely that people run into when you want to print stuff. I've worked a little bit with the U.S. Small Business Development Center in Springfield, and they often print things, and they found that they had to get the legal size sheets that are longer than 8.5 by 11. They're 8.5 by 15, so they can fit the things they need. I don't have a ton of experience with printing things from Excel because I generally
Oops, I think you froze. Oh, you're back. Okay. Yes, you're back.
Sorry about that. I don't have a lot of experience with printing. That's something that if you had a specific setting, we could probably work through and see what's the right way to organize it. I want to show one more thing here because I realize we're supposed to run till noon, right? So I should be wrapping up shortly.
Yes, yep. And then I'll just announce the next one whenever you're done.
Okay. Well, technical difficulties aside, sorry about that. The last thing I wanted to show was just a mechanism for summarizing data. There are a lot of different functions that will do this, but in this case, what I want is I want to add up and Excel will do this for us if I specify appropriately. Right? So I want anywhere where it says it's October 20th, 2020, I want to add all those values together in terms of the cases to see how many cases there were worldwide. Right? And so Excel has a number of features to add things up or count things. And so there's a sum function and a count function and an average function. But what they've also built is a conditional version of those, where you say, hey, I want the sum, but only if a condition is met. And in this case, I want the sum only if the condition of it being October 20th, 2020 is met. And so I can use the feature that's called sum if. Okay. And so this will add things up if the criterion is met. And so this is the criteria I need, which is going to be the second input. The range here is the range that's going to compare the criteria to. So I need to compare this to the values in this column. So I'm going to select column D. So anywhere in this column where it's 10, 20, 20, 20, then I want to add up a value. right? And I need to specify my criteria here. Oops, no, that's not what I needed. I need to put a comma in. So after I put my value in, I have a comma, so when I navigate away, it doesn't mess it up. I come back to my daily summary worldwide sheet because the criterion that I have is that I want it to be this date value. And then the third input is, what do I want, right? This is called the sum range. It's what values do I want to add up if the condition is met. And so I can come back here and say, I'm looking at cases. I want you to add up the values from column H if this value in A2 that I've specified is found in column D on this worksheet. And if I hit enter on this, this will say that, oh, today, as far as the European CDC can report, there were 319,000 cases of COVID-19 worldwide. And because I set this up appropriately, I can copy this down, and it'll take a second, but it will process to say, here are the number of cases on each day going back historically. So if I go back to the very beginning, we see that there weren't very many cases through January and not very many in February until we get to March, where it starts ballooning out, right? About March 15th is where we started seeing an expansion in terms of the number of cases because it started to spread in a global sense. And it steadily rose from there, basically, over the summer into the 300,000s, and that's where we sit currently. So this is the number of cases that were reported yesterday worldwide, and there were another 350,000 reported yesterday. Okay, so this is the kind of summarization you can do when you have a lot of data using the different features. And I don't necessarily expect you to have picked up exactly the mechanics of this function in this short little 2-minute bit I had for it, but just knowing that it exists so you can say, oh, I need to do something like this, and you can either go to Google and say, how do I do blank? Because I know that this is possible. Or you can always contact someone like me who can kind of steer you in the right direction. So that's most of what I have. And these things can be applied in a number of different settings. So it's, like I said, it was difficult to pick a couple of specific different examples and try and assemble them all together. So hopefully this was helpful. But Excel is a great data management tool. If you ever have questions, you're always welcome to message me. I'll be happy to help.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was really helpful. And every time I sit in on one of your workshops, I learn something else that I didn't know before. So I appreciate it. And I appreciate you also making yourself available to the students in case they have a question about, and you'll find yourself using Excel in probably ways you hadn't anticipated. So thank you so much for all of this.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh, anytime. Our next Lunch and Learn is going to be next week, October 27th, and I will be joined with a member of the Career Center. We will talk about how you find and when you apply for summer internships, especially during COVID. So the Career Center will talk about it in terms of, business. How do you find business internships? I will talk about it in terms of how do you find research-oriented internships. And these are generally internships that are 10-week intensive, and they pay you a stipend and they pay you to live and go wherever you want to go to learn. What a lot of students don't realize is that the deadlines for these are really quick. So generally by January, a lot of these are due. So we're trying to get you thinking about it. If you're not ready for it this year, definitely think about it for next year. And I hope to see a lot of you back. So thank you so much for joining us. And anytime, just reach out, any question you may have about applied experience. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you very much.
Have a good one, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.